The night the bells went silent, the red keep breathed like a sleeping beast, the wind sliding through crenels and shutter gaps and arrow slits, raising whispers where no tongues moved. In the great kitchens a pot simmered to stones. The rushes in the halls held old wine and older secrets. 37 steps below the Tower of the Hand, the breath of rats steamed faintly in lantern light, and a man in soft slippers paused to listen, head tilted, as if the stone had spoken his name. He carried no light of his own. He did not need it. The passages remembered him as surely as he remembered each loose flag, each place the mortar had crumbled to powder between two bricks. He moved through them like a memory that had never quite left, a sigh in an empty corridor, a scent of sandalwood behind a tapestry. When he reached the last turn, the place where the step was lower than it should have been, he stopped and let the air settle again. His little birds had flown and come back with what he needed. Night had done its work. Beyond the secret door lay a dim chamber warmed by coals. The old man in the chair sat as he had been made to sit, bolt upright, his hands folded against his belly, one slipper fallen away to show a foot like a winter apple. He smelled of ointments and iron. A thin line of red curved downward from the hollow behind his ear and lost itself in the collar of his night robe. Another man sprawled on the carpet, his face pressed to the weave as if he were listening to the knots whispering. Between them stood a table laid with a tankard and a plate of salt beef, a crumb clinging to the lip of the cheese. The man in slippers moved to the old lord's side and looked upon him with an open, almost tender expression. "If we are what we do, then you were steel," he murmured, so low that only the dead could have taken comfort. "And steel is a poor pillow." He tilted his head, as if listening again. Somewhere, far off, the wind faltered, and a door sighed. He took a quill from the table and pried it between his fingers until the shaft splintered. He scattered the shards in the brazier. Then he set the chair very slightly askew, and straightened the old man's hands, and nudged the fallen slipper back against the cold heel. When he had done all this, he drew up a stool and sat. He did not much care for taking comfort from the dead, but the room would give him none while he stood, and there were words to speak in silence. "Forgive me, Lord of Lannisters," he said, looking into the brow that had once been a frown that could chasten a court. "You were the last true check, the last weight on a scale gone reckless. You loved your house. You even loved the realm in a manner of speaking. But there are moments when the old balances cannot hold, when a scale must be overturned and a new one built. If I've tipped you, it was because everything has gone to one pan and made a mockery of the judgment we pretend to serve. This is not a kind place for boys." He thought of another boy, not this old man's grandson, nor a son of him who had been Lord of the Rock before him. The boy he thought of had grown across 10 ships and 100 tents, learning the language of oarsmen and sells words, the rules of dice, the smell of old silk stuffed with coins. He had learned to ride the deck of a cog as if it were a destrier, to break bread with men who wore their swords as easily as their sleep. When he smiled, he gathered attention as one gathers bright stones on a shore. When he slept, he dreamed of a hall where his footsteps did not echo because it had been built for him before there had been a hymn at all. "As for your king," the man in slippers whispered, "may the 7 be gentle. There is a place for gentle souls. It is not on the Iron Throne." He didn't say the boy's name, not for the dead. He rose, feeling the old ache in his knees that came of too much stooping on stone. Somewhere in the walls, a mouse skittered. Somewhere above, the bells had not rung. He moved toward the secret door, and the bricks recognized him again. He went not to his old chambers, but to a room whose only door was the one that not even the rats used. There he unwrapped the parcel that had traveled with him from Pentos, not by ship but from hand to hand, each hand so well paid that it had forgotten how to count. He laid the thing inside upon a cloth, a narrow circlet of hammered steel. It was unadorned save for 7 small sockets, each fashioned as a star, empty still. He had friends in the street of steel who had done the work. He had friends who would bring the gems. He had a friend, in particular, whose friendship had been bought with the old coin called truth. In the morning, the city woke to the smell of the river and the gossip of dawn. But the bells did not wake. for the rope in the belfry of the Great September had been cut in the night, and the man who would have mended it had been found with his fingers broken, as if he had tried to count too high. The cobbler's boys said that meant a curse on the day. The fishwives said the wind was in their favor and set their prices a half-copper higher. The man in slippers left his hidden ways as the sun struck the river like a thrown plate. He took up a wooden bowl and a patched cloak and joined the procession that formed each day before the steps of the Great September. Hungry men, tired women, children with the air of old people, a few guards whose armor had learned to sigh. The lines moved like water through a narrow place, channeled by rope and patience. At the top stood ragged brothers and sisters of the faith who held baskets of brown bread and pots of small beer. Between them and the city stood a man in plain linen whose eyes were the color of wet stone. The man in linen saw the man with the bowl, and a flicker passed across his face, like the shadow of a cloud that cannot decide whether to be cloud or shadow. "You've come as a beggar," he said without moving his mouth much, which Ade the words sound as if they had been thought by both men at once. The bowl-laden man bowed his head. "I have come as I am." "So you always say." The man in linen had a way of looking through silk, steel, and skin down to the bone and asking whether the bones were honest. He had done it with queens. It had not made him a courtier. "Are we at last to speak of what you made me wait to hear? If I had told you last week, you would have said the week after would do as well. But the rope was cut. There are days that still need bells, Septon." "You need the bells?" the High Septon said, a dry amusement in the corner of his mouth. "Which is curious, for they rarely ring to announce virtue at court." He turned his head slightly. His hair was gray in ways that could not be feigned. "Speak then, but talk to me as you talk to your own ghosts, and I will weigh what you give me in the same scales you used with them. Then listen as if your life were a candle and the wind were rising," the other said, and handed up not only his bowl but a folded paper that had once been the back of a ledger in bravos, though the ink upon it now was fresh and written in a hand too careful to be honest. The High Septon unfolded the page and read what had been made to seem a letter written by a man dead many years, a man whose jaw had never known laughter. It said, in so many words, that a king had known a thing in his bones and written it only because bones could be stolen and waved like banners, and it was good to have ink to shield them. It recounted the colors of hair, the cast of a mouth, the way a line of princes had never thrown the same coin twice until one woman's bed it said enough, and it signed itself with a name whose very letters might still have bruised the paper. But ink only said what a man wanted it to say. Men made it say yes, no, love, death. The High Septon did not raise his brow or smooth his tunic. He handed the letter back. "I have seen for myself what seed makes," he said. "I do not need a dead lord to teach me my numbers. If what you bring is proof, it must rest on more than the simple harvest of sin." The mother confessed only the fruits for which she could claim a penance that would not kill her. She denied the rest. "I may weigh a lie, but I do not crown an orphan truth." "Your Grace," said the man in the cloak, and if the older honorific slipped out it was not from flattery but from habit. "I brought you the letter because the city understands letters. There are other proofs, kept beneath other lamps." His voice dipped. "I can put into your hands the man who stood the watch when the queen's brother entered her door thrice in the Lord's night, and twice again before dawn. I can give you the woman who warmed the bed afterward and washed the sheets and kept a thread of gold hair caught in the linen chest's hinge to remind herself that the high are no more clean than the low. I can give you her thread." "Thread snarl," the High Septon said. "What else?" "A book of lineages and the hair of 4 stable boys who have sired bastards on girls of the flea bottom and beg nothing of them but a smile. Your acolytes can make the comparisons. The wheel will turn the same answer each time. And if I find that a king was never a king?" The tone did not change. The eyes narrowed the smallest fraction. "Then the crown on his brow becomes hollow metal, no more than any helm. The city will accept that if the 7 proclaim it." He glanced past the sept, toward the river. "And the river brings more than fish. There is a raft coming. On it the truth wears a boy's face. Let the people see the gods weigh him." The High Septon held out his hands. They were clean yet rough, as if he had washed other men's dirt from them every day for 50 years. "You bring more than threads and hair. I bring an answer to a prayer you have never let yourself speak, the other said softly. You know this city's sickness. It is not lust or gluttony, though it smells of both. It is fear. Men fear men. The great fear each other and use the small as shields. That cannot be cured by sermons alone. The small need a king who answers a different fear of the wrong. Not a boy with a sweet mouth, not a man fat with old victory. A king who owes the city before he owes any lord. I can bring you that king, but he will not be the only claimant. You mean the Queen of Dragons? The High Septon said, voice flat. I hear many tales of her. Some are told by men whose hands used to be small and brown and empty, and who now carry spears. I mean the Queen. The city may one day burn for her. The softness vanished. I have had dealings with fire. I detest its justice. He bowed, a full, courtly bow that made the cloak slide and show, for an instant, a richer cloth stitched beneath. Your Holiness, feed me if you will. I ask for nothing else. You lie every day, spider? The High Septon said, not unkindly. But you do not lie to yourself. For that alone I will listen. Go then. The gods see you. He raised a hand and a sister placed a heel of bread in the beggar's bowl. The man turned away, blending into the crowd like a drop of rain becoming the sea. 3 hours later, the rope had been mended. At midday the bells rang, not for a wedding, nor for a funeral. The sound was not triumphant. It was the sound ships make when they come through fog, calling not for joy, nor for sorrow, but for attention. To the east in the Bay of Crabs, a caravan of black-sailed galleys hugged the coast. One of them carried a boy who had learned, too young, to carry his own name. He stood with his hands on the rail, feeling the wood under his palms. It had been his teacher's idea to keep him on smaller craft when the sea was rough, to teach him balance. He had never fallen. He did not intend to now. Wind flattened his hair against his brow. It was the color of dusk before a storm. See, said a man whose hair had turned iron gray where it not surrendered to white. He wore nothing that marked him except the way he held himself and the thinness of his mouth when he wanted to say too much. He pointed with his chin. The city shows her teeth even when she smiles. Count them. 100 towers, the boy said, squinting as the city emerged from haze. And 1,000 windows with faces behind them. They think they know who I am. They know what they're told, the older man said. And they remember what killed them before. That's less than knowing. More than enough. The boy rested his elbow on the rail. If I ask you again, will you give me the same answer? Yes, the man said. Because every time you ask, you tell me your mind is set and you only want me to sand the rough edge. You will go before the faith. And you will walk close and say nothing, the boy said, but it was not reproach. There was a smile in it. I have been told the gods like those who speak for themselves. If they wanted me to speak for you, the other said, they would have given me a prettier tongue. He coughed then, once, a dry sound he tried to swallow. The boy pretended not to hear it. They had made pacts with silence before. By the time the galleys were anchored below the mud of the Blackwater and their men were set to watch the planks as if they were treasure, the bells had announced a convocation at the Great September that not even the faith held lightly. The boy came ashore not in armor but in a jerkin of black wool and a shirt so white that it reminded him of winter birds. He wore no sword. Men watched from the wharves with their fish and their nets, from the doors of alehouses and warehouse lofts, from balconies too fine for their faces. Children ran on the margins like small dogs circling a grander animal. Is that him? One said, pointing with a two-fingered hand. He looks like nobody's father. He looks like a song, said his sister, who had tied her hair back with a strip of sailcloth and had no patience for poetry in practice. Watch your purse. They moved from the river in procession. The older man at his side did not carry a banner, but behind them walked men who wore their war like their shadows, easy and ready. Some bore scars that had nothing to do with swords. Not all scars are cut into skin. The steps of the Great September of Baelor seemed to go to the sky. He climbed them barefoot. The stone was warm where the sun had licked it all morning and cool where the moon had taught it patience. He heard the sounds of the crowd as a single thing, and he heard, within that, the places where the single thing broke into 1,000 pieces: laughter, derision, appetite, hunger, that sound men make when they hope they are about to understand. At the top waited the man in linen, the gray in his hair a banner of its own. "Boy," the High Septon said, and it was not unkind. "Septon," the boy said, and bowed his head, not in the way of vassals, but the way men bow to wells when they drink from them because the water is cold and they intend to be surprised. They went inside. The sept smelled of stone and beeswax and wool and breath. The rainbows cast by the great windows lay on the floor like fallen tapestries. The images in the glass looked down with faces that never changed and never rested. Candles muttered to themselves, and the floor held the weight of 1,000 times 1,000 feet that had come here to pray or to pretend to, and sometimes to fall asleep and drool a little when they thought no one was watching. The boy stood between two pillars. The little men of the faith, the acolytes, the beggar brothers, the women who scrubbed the floors and polished the lamps, moved with baskets and cloths like a current around him but did not touch him. A woman came to him with a bowl and a cloth and gently washed his feet. She did not look into his face. When she finished, she dried his soles and left the cloth at his feet. It was stained with the dust of the steps. The boy did not look at it either. He watched the High Septon watching him. A man stepped from the shadows and placed a thing upon the altar. It was an old book, bound in leather. Another placed a lock of hair. A third set down a folded paper. The boy did not know what names the book contained, though he had learned them once in a tent with a teacher who read as if each line were a rope over a canyon, and they must cross it without falling. He knew his own hair well enough. It came away easily when he tugged at it, too easily sometimes, as if it belonged to the past and not to him. "Who are you?" the High Septon asked, his voice filling the space without the least effort. "I am Aegon," the boy said. "Aegon, son of..." He stopped. He had said the names to himself many times, as if he could make them strong by repetition. The names tasted like blood and salt. The son of Rhaegar, Prince of Dragonstone, and Elia of Dorne. "And why are you here?" The small question was the larger trap. He saw it and said what he had practiced only in the deepest night when the bare planks could be counted. Because a thing can be what it is and still require witness. A king with no witness is a man wearing metal. The god, it filled his hand like another hand. "Will you rule for yourself?" the High Septon asked. The question cracked like ice. "Or for the realm?" The boy looked into heat. He remembered a night in a tent when he had asked a man with iron-gray hair why any boy should want to be king. The man had not answered. He had handed him a ledger and told him to read the column where rents were recorded and the column where taxes were collected and the column where food was given to men who would die without it. Later, he had said, "At the bottom of those columns is a king. If he is dead, so are they." "For the realm," the boy said. "Who is the realm?" The High Septon's voice did not change. The windows flicked light across his brow like a thought passing. "Those who cannot stop a levy when a lord's appetite grows. Those who bury their sons without the priest because the priest has been called to the castle. Those who think the seven see them and doubt it when the storms come and the Lord keeps his grain." He looked up. He did not look at the windows. "Those who have only the gods, your grace." A murmur moved, not with the certainty of joy nor with the restlessness of anger. Men shifted their weight. Somewhere near the back, a child coughed and was hushed. The High Septon extended his hand and took the brand, hanging it back on its hook. He looked into the boy's face a long time in the silent light. "Bring me the book," he said at last, and one of his acolytes stepped forward with the volume of lineages and names and years, and the High Septon opened it where he had placed a strip of cloth. He read a page. He closed it again. He placed the book on the altar and laid his palm flat on the leather. "Bring me the hair." The lock was set beside the book and the folded note that carried a dead lord's name. "Bring me the woman." There are many kinds of courage. The woman they brought had the sort that is not named because it does not wear armor. She had the sort that picks up plates, that keeps small coins in small jars, that remembers everything because no one else will. She stood before the great September with her hands folded as if they had been folded all her life. She looked at the boy as if he were a window that had never before been opened in her room and showed her a piece of sky. "You served in the royal bedchamber," the High Septon said. "You kept the linens." "I," she said, "my mother kept them before me. And the queen." His tone did not change. "What did she keep?" "She kept her secrets," the woman said, and the words were not bitter. They had been worn smooth by too much rubbing. "And I kept the lintel cloth where one thread stuck. I gave it to a sister long ago when my hands began to shake. I confessed I did. Not for my part, but for knowing and saying nothing. I could not pull a queen down. But I can speak her down now, with what's left of my tongue." There was a rustle like silk, though the only silk in the room was the light on the windows. The High Septon lifted his hand. "You are heard," he said. Then, to his acolytes, "Take this confession. We will keep it with the others." "And the boy?" the woman asked, surprising herself. She looked down, as if scolding her own mouth. "This boy, your grace, is he what he says?" "Men are what they prove," the High Septon said. He looked again at the boy with the dust-colored hair and the clean white shirt. He saw there things other men might have missed. The way the boy did not look away, the way he pressed his lips together when he was afraid. "And boys are what they become." He lifted the circlet from the altar. It had been hammered in a poor man's forge, with a smith's rescord hammer whose head was a little off, so the blows had left tiny tilts in the stars that would not be seen unless one put the band close to one's eye. The sockets were empty. The High Septon looked into the faces represented in the glass. The mother, the warrior, the crone, all the rest. "You ask a judgment," he said. "I give you this. By the power of the faith, I proclaim that the boy called Tommen is not legitimate. He is gentle. He harms no one. But we do not make kings from kindness alone. The sin that begot him is greater than the love that would keep him on the throne. He shall be given to the mother's mercy. We will keep him, and he shall come to no harm. He will be made comfortable, and he will pray for the realm." From the far side of the sept a woman's breath came in, sharp as a knife going into a board. It was the noise a hawk makes when it sees the shadow of a bigger hawk. The boy did not turn his head to find her. He kept his eyes on the man of linen. "As for you," the High Septon said, and he stepped forward, the circlet in his hands. "Claim your name properly. Kneel." The boy kneeled upon the polished stone, which had been worn not by kings but by penitents. The High Septon set the circlet lightly on his head. It did not bite his brow. It was heavier in his mind than on his skull. "Rise, Aegon," he said. "Rise, Aegon of House Targaryen, called sixth of his name. If you would not make a lie of this day, rule modestly. If you would not end it swiftly, rule strongly. There is time yet for jewels." The boy rose. "No trampits. No lords offering swords. No dragons." Only a sound like the wind realizing that the door would be opened whether it liked it or not. Outside, the city had begun to decide what it would do with this new truth. The gold cloaks, who had not known how to hold themselves at ease all morning, shifted almost happily onto their heels. They had been given orders 2 nights before by a man with nothing about him that told his name, who knew which captains had sons and which had mistresses and which had debts. He had not threatened. He had asked for time. He had left gold on a table and a small bird listening from the rafters to make certain that those who took it would remember what they had promised. In the Red Keep, a queen mother threw a wine cup against a wall whose plaster had known much worse and screamed until her throat forgot how to make the note. The man in the corner with eyes like wet gravel did not move. "He cannot hold it," she said, and her voice came out raw. "He cannot keep that throne against steel. He has words, and the city loves a word for a day. Then it remembers it is hungry. The city has no one to march it," Qyburn said gently. "Our house has lost the hand, and the other keeps their soldiers where their fields are because a fisherman with a crown has taken their islands. We will not be able to bring them." He tipped his head. He had learned how to be soothing in black cells, where so many men cried for their mothers. "But we have you, and we have armor." He allowed himself a small smile. And we have a champion the gods themselves cannot weigh. She clutched the seat of her chair. Her hair had grown back enough to be braided, and she had braided it with a tightness that made her scalp ache. When she closed her eyes, she saw not soldiers, not a river of spears, but a boy who smelled of milk and wore his crown as if it might break. "Bring him," she said, and all the soft things in her life ran off and hid behind stones. So Sir Robert Strong came, step by step, the floor's boards uttering tiny prayers under his weight. He smelled of salt and oils, and something underneath that oil could not entirely smother. He bowed, a motion like a crane lowering its head to a pond. "My lady," said Qyburn, his voice smooth as cream, "if the faith will not take our proof for their own, we must show them a spectacle that will make them jealous of their power." She bared her teeth like an animal. "You think I want a spectacle?" she hissed. "My son is taken from me. They would make him a little brother to every hungry brat in their houses. They would put a gray robe on him and teach him to bless their bread. I want the city to choke. I want wolves in their beds." "Wolves are in the north," Qyburn said, as if considering their migratory habits. "What we have are men with knives. We will use them, but the city has seen many knives. It will remember this day for the thing it has never seen. Bring your champion to the September. Let them weigh strength against sanctity. I do not say to slay a boy. He is not there now, and if he were, we would stay a while for the right wind. I say, show them that the holy are not the only ones who keep secrets." She looked at him, her throat working. "You would unmask him." Qyburn spread his hands slightly. "If we choose the moment, we choose the story. If they choose it, we are the tale told." "I want their blood," she said. "And you shall have," he said, "something that will stain." In the great September, the new crowned boy had not yet left the chancel when the crowd parted as water parts for a keel. A tall shape entered, moving with a strange deliberation that did not belong to lords or soldiers. Behind him came men in red cloaks that had lost their luster with laundering. Their boots clicked in unison like someone tapping the rim of a pot with a spoon. The High Septon's eyes narrowed. "We are in a house of prayer," he said evenly. "We have come to pray that the faith remembers its place," said a voice from the doorway, and the Queen Mother stepped through, her hand resting lightly on the arm of the thing she had brought. The sight of her braided hair made 3 old women in the back put their hands up to their own heads and touched the gray there without knowing why they had done it. "I bring my knight to claim my son. Where is he? Where is Tommen?" "He is already at peace, in a place where men who only come to pray on occasion do not step," the High Septon said, and it was a rebuke that somehow did not sear as it should have. "Leave your champion at the door if you would be heard." "My champion stands where I stand," Cersei said. "He is my mouth in all things. If you deny him, you deny me." "Then we will not deny him," the High Septon said. He looked at the boy. "Stand aside, Aegon." The boy stepped 2 paces left. Sir Robert advanced. He stood before the altar and tilted, just slightly, so that his blank helm seemed to mark the High Septon, the boy, the carved faces in the glass, and the crowd as points to be counted. The High Septon reached out his hand. "Remove your helm," he said. The air changed. It does that when a room realizes that a demand will either be obeyed or lead to something broke beyond mending. Qyburn's eyes flicked, just once, toward the Queen. The Queen's mouth flattened. Sir Robert's gauntlet hands rose and grasped the helm. For a second it seemed he would simply hold it and make nothing of the command. Then he lifted. What lay beneath was not a face. The word face requires symmetry the way a boat requires water. There was no symmetry here. There was substance, the damp pallor of it, the way the lips, if those were lips, pulled too far back from teeth that were too far forward, as if the mouth had forgotten which way it should meet a cup. The smell came then, the perfume and oils giving up the ground they had no right to hold. Men inhale before they draw blades. Priests inhale before they speak. A man near the back inhaled and vomited, gagging into his hands, which made the people near him think they should move, and so they did, and where they moved they shoved into other people, and the movement became opinion. The High Septon did not step back. He put his hands on the altar and stood as if the stone were a thing he had been married to so long that it had his smell. "You desecrate," he said softly. "You defamed," Cersei said, and the sound of her own voice galvanized her. "Show them then how your sanctity fares against my strength. Here is a knight who has no equal. He will prove that you cannot make a lie true with candles." The High Septon straightened. "We do not match swords with monsters," he said, and his eyes turned to Aegon, whose jaw was clenched and whose hands hung open because he had made them open. "We weigh men, and we weigh kings." He lifted from the altar the empty circlet with the 7 star sockets and held it up. "By this sign I proclaimed the day. The sign is empty still. We had thought to mark it with gems when the markets opened." He looked to the woman in the doorway, to the thing beside her, and to the city behind them, which was a hungry animal even when it had eaten. "We will mark it now, not with baubles." He signaled, and a brother came forward bearing a pouch of small steel stars that had been cut by a smith who had once made nails. The stars were not perfect. The points were a little uneven. They glittered, however, when the light touched them, and the light in the sept did not believe in withholding. One by one, the High Septon pressed them into their sockets. The circlet looked much the same, but it was finished, and things that have been finished have an authority that in the end men bow to. The Queen Mother made a motion with her hand that meant something in a court where things were still in their place, and 2 men in red moved forward, the hooks at their belts rocking. The gold cloak stirred. The men who had walked barefoot from the river lifted their heads. The boy's guardian, the gray-haired one, bent his mouth toward his prince's ear and said nothing, and that nothing was the right thing to say. The first red cloak reached for the boy. He did it without malice. He had not thought of whether he believed in kings because he had not had to. The boy stepped back and did not reach for a sword. He lifted his empty hands. "Do not mistake me," he said, and his voice carried in a way that would have surprised him if he had had time to be surprised. "I do not stand here to take anything from anyone with hands. I stand here to take the weight from those who cannot lift it. If you would take me to the people and ask them whether they would have me." He turned his face toward Cersei. He did not speak to her as a supplicant speaks. "If your son is not the king, he is still a boy who did not ask to be hurt by truths sharper than knives. Keep him safe. I ask it, not because I fear him, because I have known what it is to be the last child at a table. There are many ways to strangle a riot before it begins. One is to present it with a child's face. Another is to make everyone in the room think, for a second, of someone they once fed who did not belong to them." The High Septon lifted the circlet very slightly. Then he set it back upon the boy's head with the stars pressed in. "Go now," he said, "and you, my lady, leave your horror with your physician. He has made you a miracle of sorts. Miracles have a way of devouring their inventors." Cersei spat upon the floor. It landed upon stone that had known worse and dried as quickly. She turned and went, her champion's helm still in his hands. The boy left by a side door, not because he sought to skulk but because the High Septon had put his hand on his sleeve and guided him there, a small, practical gesture that had nothing of pageantry in it. On the steps outside, on the bright white, the city made of eyes and mouths and hands lay waiting. The boy descended slowly, as one descends into water whose depth is unknown. At the bottom, a woman thrust a cabbage upon him. He took it. A man tried to kiss his hand. He drew his hand back, gently, and put it on the man's shoulder instead. Then the gold cloaks closed around the new thing, not as captors but as men who knew which way a tide was running and were content to walk without swimming for once. That night, in a room with a window that looked upon darkness and stone, the boy sat in a chair and held the circlet in his lap. It looked smaller off his head. He put his thumbs against 2 of the ugly little stars. "It is light," he said. "That is why crowns are dangerous," said the man with the iron-gray hair. He sat opposite, his hands flat upon his knees. "Men will hold them up without knowing their weight." "I spoke wrong," the boy said. "I spoke like a man who has not seen winter. I asked mercy of a woman I should have named enemy." You spoke as a man who remembered he had been a boy, the other said. Do not let that be flayed from you. They will try. They will say it is weakness. It is not. Do you believe the gods? Aegon asked. It was the first time he had used his own name within walls that once had belonged to it. I believe men, the other said. I believe what fear makes and what love mends. And I believe in debts, he added with a small smile. We owe, we collect. That is religion enough. You cough, Aegon said. Only at night, the other said lightly. And when fools speak, he lifted a hand. You will hear much from the Dornish. Their prince will send his lords with silk in their words and sand in their boots. Their princess may come herself. She will be as clever as you, and more patient than your anger, if you are not careful. Promise nothing that you do not intend to keep. I already promised them, Aegon said quietly, in a tent with candles and a parchment. I promised to marry their own. You promised to marry a promise, the older man said. When a woman stands before you, promises change their shape. See that yours does not. In Sunspear, a woman stood in a chamber with windows that let in the sea and a wind that carried the coppery smell of heat on stone. Her father sat like a statue, his leg weighted by the sand snake hidden there, and held a letter in his hand. He had waited until the parchment should have worn thin. They have done it, he said, in a voice that never rose, because he had spent a life learning that men will always provide what you do not ask for loudly. They have crowned a dragon, Arianne Martell said. She stood barefoot because the day had been foolishly hot and her sandals had rubbed the soft places raw. Not a girl with storms in her hair. A boy named as your cousin's son and mine, Doran Martell said. They have crowned him where our sisters bond. Yes, we're not spared, where her children were called false. There is an irony any poet should praise. I do not. I am not a poet, and irony never kept a spear from finding a gut. Arianne took the letter from him. She read the words put there by men who had learned how to draw sentences into little marching orders, each syllable a soldier. She read the description of the circlet, the empty sockets, and the fact of the stars. She read of a queen mother bringing a thing that should not have walked into a house of prayer. She read of a boy who had asked for mercy for a child not his own and who had ascended the steps barefoot. When she finished, she looked into her father's face as if there were more to read there. You thought to send me to him, she said. I think to send you still, Doran said. What I thought to do before was to weigh him with your eyes. Now the scales have been tipped. The faith has added stones. Still, you will measure for me. She drew herself up. If he is Rhaegar's son, we owe him more than our eyes. We owe him what our sister's memory demands, Doran said, and what the sands can give. We owe our own thought. No one else owns it. He lifted his head, and for once the weight of years slipped, and she saw the young lord who had once climbed the spear tower in 3 breaths. Take men you trust and letters you will not show. If he is the boy he must be, offer him our spears, and hold him to the paper he signed in a tent. Quentyn would have gone, she said, surprised by the way the name rose and the way it hurt her throat. Quentyn went, and he did not come back. Quentyn went to a woman who rides fire, Doran said, and the hand with the letter trembled very slightly. This one does not ride fire. He rides a word. That is a steed that kills more slowly and in ways men can live long enough to regret. But we cannot ask the world only to do what we understand. She bowed her head. I will go. She left that day laden with a train of sand and citrus, her hair bound up beneath a light scarf that let her neck breathe and kept the grit from her teeth. The men she took with her rode in silence because they had learned to hold their words like water in their mouths until the heat had passed. On the 3rd night she lay on her back in a tent and looked up at a canvas that had been patched so many times that it had become a map of a land no one had named. She did not sleep. She thought of a boy who knelt and a boy who died because he wanted the world to be warmer than it is. In the Stormlands, the Golden Company drank from cups that had once been brought by men with different masters and made promises to seek pay wherever their feet would be allowed to rest. They had thought to ride directly on the city after they took a dozen holds and sent men scattering like rodents from wheat. Now their captain watched the river and rubbed his leg where an old wound reminded him which direction power often travels. "We have taken a rock and called it a throne," said Harry Strickland, quietly, and no one laughed. "We will build around it as if it were a well." John Cunnington, griff to those who had called him that when they had needed to keep names under the lid, sat his horse and thought of the rain in a particular courtyard he had left decades ago where he had once wished to die. He thought of Rieger's music. He thought of the knight's cough. "We will build," he said aloud. "No more wastes, no more brave gestures. We have the crown. Now we need the fields." He sent letters to men whose names he could only just write without wanting to spit, the lords of the Stormlands who had bent the knee to stags and lions in turn, and he told them that their old oath had come back to find them and would not be carried away by tide this time. He sent a letter to the Marcher Lords of Dorne, hedging it with courtesy and calling back old pig hunts and boundary feasts. He sent a letter north, half angry, to a man whose mail shirt had grown into his skin, asking whether any of the river's country could remember what it had been before it had been broken. In King's Landing, the new council met under a ceiling whose paint flaked like old pastry. Varys entered last, which was a trick of timing, not a measure of respect. He had pressed the new crown into the new king's hands and laid out the room this way so that when he entered it would seem as if he had been expected all along. The boy sat where some would insist the boy sit until his seat defined him. He perched forward, elbows near the table, as if he expected the future to roll across the wood like a set of dice and wanted to catch them mid-bounce. To his right sat a man who had been a sellsword and not ashamed of it. To his left an older knight whose mail had dented but not broken. Halden, who read, sat near the ink with the air of a man who had come by accident upon a position and would leave it by design. "We have 3 labors," Varys said by way of greeting, and eased himself into a chair that had a generous cushion and had been placed where the light would flatter his face. "We must feed the city, we must pay the men who are sworn to us, and we must murder no one who will be worth more to us alive." "And what of those worth more dead?" asked the sellsword, smiling with eyes that remembered poverty well enough to wear it as a garment when it suited. "Then we will speak of it when we must," Varys said, mild. "But be hesitant to decide the worth of any man's death too swiftly. Revenge is a poor accountant." "Ser Davos said something like that," murmured Halden, and the others shifted their mouths. Varys stored the Alexandrian detail away. Halden remembered names that were relevant in ways other men would not see until they were already being hanged. "We cannot count on the Reach," Varys continued. "Though their wildflowers do well in chapels when a young king puts on crowns, their hearts are in their fields, and their ships are enmeshed with a foreign matter." He inclined his head to Aegon. "The Ironborn have taken the Shield Islands. Lord Paxter will not hazard the Mander for your sake. He will squander himself on his own. That is a blessing disguised as their pride." "Cersei?" asked Aegon. It hurt him a little to say her name. He thought of the way she had looked at him, as if his bones were a mask she might snap and find something behind it she could cup in her hands and break. "She will not sit. She rarely sits when she could pace," Varys said. "She will send daggers. She will send whispers that do not whisper as softly as mine. She will send money if she can find it. When she cannot, she will reach for a jug of fear and she will pour. We would do well to put a lid on it before she has tipped half the city into the stew." He steepled his fingers. "The faith has Tommen. That buys us time because a boy is an argument one must make in soft tones. We will treat for his care as kings treat for prisoners who are gentlemen. And we will pay. It is cheaper to buy mercy than to be seen denying it." Aegon looked at the names on the parchment before him. One of them was the name of a street, another the name of a wharf, another the name of a baker who baked 100 loaves between dawn and the hour of prayer and had never held a sword. He had always been good with columns. His teacher had said so. "What of Dorne?" he asked. The word was a place he had once been taught by a woman whose hands smelled faintly of old candles. They will expect what you promised," Varys said gently. "And they will send you something that will make it easier for you to promise forever. The princess will come. She will be more sun than moon. She will not let you mistake the difference between politeness and consent." He smiled very slightly. She will set her hands on the table the first time she sits and look at your men and decide, without you, which to bend and which to bribe. Pick the one she cannot bend and sit him beside her at dinner. They will be friends within a fortnight. Do you speak of me? Asked the Sellsword, grinning. I speak generally, Varys said. But if the shoe fits, my dear Raleigh, do wear it with your best stockings. Nights in the Red Keep have a sound. The sound is not silence. It is a summation of small noises made private by stone. The settling of a rafter, the scratch of a quill, the footfall of a guard who has learned to step as a cat steps, the click of some small hidden creature's teeth on a grain. Aegon learned this quickly, because his first nights as king did not include sleep. He walked corridors with a lamp and learned how tapestries warp at night as they suck in or breathe out the day's damp. He discovered a room where 3 old helms had been set upon pikes like heads, their visors closed, facing a blank wall, and he laughed, not unkindly, because even armor needed something to look at. He found the old cellars where skulls had once been kept and were no longer there. Only the places where they had rested like birds had once nested and left stains that could not be washed from the rafters. He stood there a long time thinking of dragons he had never seen, and of one he had heard of, and of a girl across an ocean who had begun to become legend while still very young. He did not dislike legends, but he feared when men began to act to fit the words that would be easier to tell later. He did not want that. He wanted to be puzzled and to puzzle. He wanted time. He had less of it than he thought. On the 4th morning, as he held open audience in the throne room, not on the iron chair, but on a seat of oak set below it as if to suggest a future without shocking the past, a fisherman came with a hat in both hands and told him that his son had been taken for a press to a galley that did not fly the king's colors, nor anyone's colors the fisherman could name. Aegon listened. He asked 2 questions that might have seemed to some a waste of a king's breath, one about the smell of the tar, the other about the way the pressman had carried himself, and he gave an order. By evening the galley had been found where the river bends and the mud sucks, and the captain had been brought in chains, and the boy was sitting on a stool with a loaf of hot bread he held with both palms, gleeful at its sting. By such things kings secure chairs. But the next day, an arrow flew through the window of a room where Haldan was writing and lodged in the wood above his ear with a certain thoughtful courtesy, as if it had been aimed by someone who preferred to give warning first. The day after that, a small boy, one of the Faith's beggar children who had brought news in hope of a coin, was found with his throat cut in an alley that smelled of new-cut hay because someone had spilled bales there to dry. On the 6th day, the captain of the city watch, once a man with uncertainties in him, now less so, reported that 3 of his men had been summoned privately by an old acquaintance who offered them a pouch of good silver and a chance at immortality if they would merely be standing at a public well at a particular hour and shout a particular name when the bucket was hauled up fast enough to spill. Immortality, Aegon said, a smile twitching that could not decide whether to be amused or angry. For shouting, no less. They meant to say notoriety, Varys said benignly, which in certain circles amounts to much the same. Aegon rubbed the bridge of his nose. We cannot be everywhere, and if we try, we will become the thing that watches without blinking. My teacher used to say that when a baker is awake too long, he burns bread. John Cunnington closed his eyes and opened them. Choose the wells, then, he said hoarsely, the cough he thought he'd conquered sharpening his sound. Let them shout, and let your men be there to say louder what they shout, but true. We will not stop rumor. We will become it. They did. When men see, read that the new king had been crowned by conspirators in the dark. The watch's irons rang in markets while a bellman cried, crowned at noon under 7 windows. Shoes off, if you please. When a whisper said he had sworn to burn the septs and salt the mother house, the gates of the mother house opened and the king's steward carried in sacks of flour and left without speaking to a soul except to bow to an old woman who did not see him because she was blind. Misinformation is a weed. Trample it and you scatter seed. They burned it at the root wherever they could, and where they could not, they starved it by making light. On the 9th day, Arian Martell's party was sighted south of the Rosby Road. She came to the city like someone who had once fallen in love with it, and then remembered that it had chewed her friend's bones and smiled while doing it. She went at once to the Red Keep, and the new steward, young, too earnest, rode in front with a banner that had been hastily sewn. The old dragon reworked from a bed hanging, one of its heads a little longer than the other two. Arianne saw the flaw and smiled despite herself. "There," she said to her captain. "That is honesty for once." In the throne room, she walked with her father's slow economy and her mother's swing. Aegon rose from the oak seat when he saw her, which courtly training will teach you to do in time. He had not yet learned to wait for help before he moved. He descended the 2 steps between the oak and the floor and put out his hand. "Princess," he said. "Cousin," she replied without any hesitation. "That is our word, is it not? Cannot call you king yet. I will not call you false, unless you make me. But cousin, my father will permit that much, and so will my heart." They stood looking at one another with intelligent speculations at work behind both sets of eyes. They saw each a person and then a map where the person stood. Arianne's mouth softened, then tightened. Aegon's mouth did much the same. "You came quickly," he said. "The sands do not forgive delay," she said. "Nor do histories. They forgive almost nothing," he said. "It is why I prefer ledgers. You can fix ledgers." He gestured. "Come." Tell me what your father thinks when he is not saying it." She sat with him in a small room with a table that had known better evenings and drank wine that had not. She found him easy in questions and steady when she made answers that would have kept lesser boys up at night. She told him her father's word. "We will honor what you promised. We will weigh what you've become." She watched him as she spoke, looking for the flinch. He did not flinch. When she asked him, softly, in a voice that did not carry in the corridor, whether he feared the Dragon Queen, he did not say no. "I fear everyone who rides fire," he said. "Even still, I would have her for an ally. But I would not have her burn my people to prove she is strong enough not to." "Men love fire until it licks their own doors," Arianne said. "Dorne has burned, and burned others. We know." He said nothing to that. Men who understand beginnings know that certain sentences will sharpen themselves without help. At sunset, when the river showed the sky its own face and made it blush, Arianne walked the outer wall alone. Jon Connington joined her after a time, not close enough to be impertinent, not so far that she could not acknowledge him. He bowed his head, a motion that was nearly apologetic. "Princess," he said. "You are the boy's steel," she said. "You shine and you cut and you will rust faster than he thinks." He smiled with one side of his mouth. "Everything rusts," he said. "If you came to ask how long I've got, you might not like the answer." "I came to ask," she said, "what you think he will do when she comes, the one with dragons. Will he raise a cup to her? Or a shield?" "I think," he said, and looked out across the city where the rooftops nuzzled together as if they were hounds in sleep, "that he will ask for her hand first. I taught him to do that, not because it will tame her, because it will put a story into the mouths of people who would otherwise be chewing on fear. If she throws the cup back in his face, we will drink the dregs. If she takes it, we will see if the wine is sweet. You will understand that it is not love I am speaking of." "Quentyn loved," Arianne said, without heat. "It didn't keep him alive. I do not expect love to carry weight when coin can." He did not answer. He coughed into his hand and looked at the smear there and closed his fist on it. She pretended not to see. In Old Town, at a table where learning sat and played with the light as it came through glass made by men who thought glass the only thing worth making, a chain-wearing man wrote a letter advising himself not to choose sides until sides more clearly distinguished themselves. In the Vale, a boy looked down from a very high place and clapped at a hawk he could not see. In the Riverlands, men ate meat with no salt and burned their hands trying to keep it from being stolen by a neighbor while they bit into it. On the sea west of the disputed lands, a captain with a smile like rope pulled tight looked at a horn laid on velvet and wondered whether he would ever see home again, and did not decide whether to care. King's Landing remembered that it could love. It loved shallow, hot, loud, and forgetfully. It cheered when Aegon walked the market where carp squirmed in tubs and bought a fish from a woman with 3 scars on one cheek. It cheered when he stilled a blow from a gold cloak's baton with a touch of his hand that had more authority than shouting. It cheered when he pardoned a bandit whose band had been his family and set him to carrying water, and when he ordered a baker who cheated his weight to spend a day in the streets teaching people what a proper loaf should weigh and how a man might measure without a set of scales. The city loved easily as a dog will, and T forgot easily as a dog also will. The city did not see what Varys did at night, because Varys made a practice of letting no one see. He wrote letters with ink that faded after a fortnight and with ink that did not. He sent children with coins in their cuffs to men who would not be suspected of knowing where those coins had come from. He had a meal with a man who wore silk very quietly and who smelled of cloves and old money, and they spoke of Illyrio Mopatus as one speaks of an uncle who lives in a house that your mother does not approve. He sent no ships that bore his name. When he came back to his chamber below the earth, he opened the box where he kept a small thing wrapped in old linen and touched it with one finger, barely, the way men touch a scar that they must acknowledge and cannot quite bear to look at. It was the square of blue cloth with a hole in it, the cloth that had once covered a brazier, the thing the sorcerer had used. It was good to remind himself that fire comes in many colors. He detested, still, all talk of magic. He put his trust in weights, in debts, in hunger. Men can be counted. Men can be paid. Men can be promised. He had promised this boy a kingdom. He had put that promise on his back and carried it through tunnels and across oceans and inside lies. Now the boy wore it and walked upright, and the promise sat on his brow and would one day press deeper than it now did. Varys lay on his pallet with hands folded on his breast and told himself that he had done what he could and that, if the dragons came, there would still be ways to weigh them. But dragons are ill-suited to scales. News came not as a trumpet, but as a whisper carried in from the stepstones by a pirate whose lip had been split by a woman who had then kissed him before leaving him for dead. Ships with black sails and bright eyes had slipped over an evening sea like knives through the belly of something that thought itself safe. In their smoke-choked wake rushed other ships, merchants, sell ships, refitted cogs that had once carried sheep and now carried men who said they preferred gold. Among them, among the bellyfuls of rumor, came this. She had left her city. She had taken with her no husband. She had taken with her 3 things that men mistook for gods. Varys read the report with his mouth not moving. He carried it to the council and said, "We must send to her, but we must not bow." "Why not?" asked Haldan, curious. "Because when you bow to fire, it expects you to prostrate. And anyway," Varys added with a small, soft smile, "we have something fire has never learned to love. We have noise. Fire prefers silence." Aegon listened with his brows knit. "We will send," he said. "We will speak her name with honor. We will call her sister and queen. We will ask her to bring her justice to our tables and sit and share it." He lifted his eyes and met Arianne's across the table. "And we will tell her that this city has chosen. We will not deliver up what it has made true because of a shadow coming over water." Arianne regarded him a long time and then nodded, just once. "Sit me next to her if she comes," she said. "Or not. I can decide if she loves me before she has looked at me, if you prefer." "I do not prefer that," Aegon said with a small laugh. "I prefer what is difficult." "You are king," Varys said gently. "You will have what you prefer less often than you think." Cersei, in her apartments, took needle and cord to a new banner and stitched upon it a thing no one had asked for. She understood that the city was no longer hers to cajole. She had never liked cajoling. She wrote letters to men whose hearts were not in their breast but in their estates and told them that sons could be knighted and daughters married if they would send certain men in certain nights to stand in certain windows. She sent the letters by men who would not return if they were caught, and she slept for the first time in a week. Qyburn visited her dreams, as men sometimes do when they have come to mean to you more than your father did. "My lady," he said in the dream as he had said in life, "if you cannot keep your son's crown, keep your son. That will be a crown that no one wears and that will therefore never make your head hurt." She woke with a taste of bile and called for wine. When it came, she did not drink it. She dipped her fingers and drew on the table 3 small antlers and crushed them with her thumb. A month ground itself out in the wheels of loyalty and refusal. Aegon signed his name so often that his wrist ached, and he feared his letters would grow childish and ruin the gravitas their loops provided. He made 3 judgments each day that he had not seen coming, and every day he sent 4 men away with coin and words, 3 to their lives and 1 to the headsman. People learned that he listened. People learned that he also turned his head when a noble's words grew heavy with the weight of his own consequence and said, "There are heavier stones in this city than the ones you carry." People learned that he allowed himself to be seen without guard in places where it mattered. People learned, too, that the gold cloaks had learned to be subtle when they needed to be and not to make their subtlety a badge they flogged men with. The city breathed. It did not yet trust itself enough to sleep. Arianne set her hands on the city where it would let her. She went to the mother house and spoke with old women who remembered her mother's cheekbones. She went to the blacksmiths and laughed at their jokes about heat with such generosity that one of them offered her a small pendant in the shape of a spearhead with a hole bored through it for a thong, and she took it and wore it for 3 days. She watched how men watched her. She watched how women watched her. She told Aegon what she saw. He listened, and he did not tell himself that because she was lovely she was wrong. John Connington stood sometimes on the ramparts, alone, and looked at the water. He had dreamed several nights running a dream he had not had in 20 years. A younger man whose music came from somewhere behind his ribs. A court where laughter was not yet brittle. A light on armor that did not blind. He woke each time to a cough that took him 2 minutes to conquer. He went to the maester with his sleeve drawn back and showed him a patch upon his wrist that had begun to look like stone smoothed by the sea. The maester touched it and did not cry out. He was too well trained. "It will not spread quickly," he lied. John looked at him and smiled without humor. "You will tell me when it is time to stop using the same cup as my king," he said. "You will do it by handing me a different cup. You will make it a good one." The maester nodded, though he wanted to say he had never been taught how to pour into such vessels. When the first sails from the east were sighted that did not belong to pirates, a murmur went through the river quarter like wind through reeds. Men talk to water. They ask it what it is bringing them. The water does not answer in words, but in wakes, and in the way light behaves. The light the river through that day had sharp edges. Varys walked down to see it and scolded himself later for indulging sentiment. He had told himself long ago he did not need to watch arrivals. He had made enough of them. The ships bore, plainly for those with eyes to read, the marks of Marine's harbors, and the men who disembarked wore belts and scabbards decorated with foreign curls and knots and small scales carved out of ebony. They brought gifts to the King of King's Landing and also messages. "She is not a day behind us," said the man who spoke best of the Seven's tongue. His skin glowed with salt. "She made the sea her friend once more." And then the city did what cities do when something greater than themselves is about to enter them. Told stories. It told that she had hair like coals, like snow, like the inside of seashells. It told that she had eyes the color of water where it is deepest and the color of pools where children play. It told that her dragons had grown past horse size and then past car size and then past the size of any words, and that their wings had shaken islands loose from the sea. It told that she had left a lover crying on a quay. It told that she had made men kneel and that she had made men love kneeling. It told that she would marry Aegon and that she would kill him and that she would take the crown in her teeth and crack it like a crab. Aegon listened. He called his council. "We must go to her," he said. "Not to the water, she is not yet here. We must go to where the city ends and emptiness begins. We must stand there, not with soldiers, with the people. We must show her what it is she comes to, and who will welcome her. We must not look afraid. You will be," Varys said, smiling. "You are wise when you know it. And if she sets fire to us all?" Asked the Sellsword, with no special worry in his tone, because there is no use in lending trouble interest it has yet to earn. "We will burn and be remembered for the way we stood," Aegon said, and there was the smallest note of joy in his voice because some boys, even with crowns, relish the unwritable moment. He saw Jon's eyes narrow and force smother the spark. "If she brings fire," Jon said with tired certainty, "offer her water." The day dawned with a wind from the south. Ships capered in their moorings. The The city's curtains lifted and fluttered, as if someone had come along the streets with a hand trailing and stroked every house at once. Aegon dressed in black wool as he always did. He put no jewels in the circlet. He walked from the Red Keep with one guard only, a girl no older than he, whose hair had been cut short because she had said she could not be kept back if it were longer. Arryn walked to his left, Jon to his right, though farther back, because he had learned when to be seen and when to be the thing that chapter headings do not mention and that wins wars anyway. They reached the place where the city ends and the salt begins. 1,000 men stood there with their hats in their hands, and 1,000 women with their mouths open, and 1,000 children with their eyes like saucers and their mouths full of something sweet. They had been bought to keep them quiet, and that was now making them hyper. The sea lifted itself and set itself down. Far off, a line of shadow broke the horizon, sweet and terrifying. It grew. Aegon could hear his heart. He set his face as he had been taught, neither grin nor grim. He felt the circlet's pressure like a rebuke and a promise. He glanced at Arryn and saw that her eyes had gone unreadable and thought, with a flare of boy, that he would like to be able to do that. He glanced at Jon and saw him not looking at the sea but at the city, and stored that away as a lesson. Remember, Varys had said to him quietly before he left the keep, whatever she brings, do not envy it. Envy is the one thing power cannot forgive. The first of the Myrinese escort ships came into the mouth of the Blackwater and turned its flank, presenting its talon-bared figurehead like an announcement. The ship behind it bore no figurehead, only a pennon so white it seemed to mock the sun. The city drew in a breath like a lung. It did not let it out. On the deck of the second ship, shaped small by distance and then, suddenly less small, stood a woman. She was dressed not like a queen who sits on a chair while men speak into her ear, but like someone who had come to work. Her hair, whatever its color, was tied back. Her arms were bare. Even at a distance Aegon saw she did not hold railings when the ship dipped. She had known seas for long enough to have decided they did not require being clung to. She did not signal. She did not wave. She stood and looked, and the city felt the looking. Aegon took one step forward. And then another. He did not think what he was doing. He had decided long before. He lifted his hand. He did not lift it as one does who orders men to move. He lifted it as one does who greets another at a threshold and means to make the moment ordinary despite its magnitude. Behind him, Jon Connington closed his eyes just once and thought of a prince who had sung under a wall while rain ran off his hair. He felt the cough rising and pushed it down with the last of the strength he knew he would have for the week. Beside Aegon, Arryn watched the woman on the ship watching Aegon and did not smile, and did not frown, and held everything of herself serene and ready. The ship glided, slowed. Men threw ropes and caught ropes, and someone jumped and landed cat stable, and tied a knot so quickly that the rope seemed to have knotted itself out of respect. Planks were run out. A space opened without anyone ordering it to. The woman came down the plank not with a warrior's stride and not with a maiden's hesitation, but with the very particular gait of someone for whom steps are not an obstacle but a part of the world to be crossed. She reached the sand. She stopped. She looked at Aegon. Here were two people who had been named before they had named themselves. They stood. They did not speak. The wind made a braid in her hair loosen and pull through her fingers. Aegon did not reach to adjust his crown because he had trained himself into not lifting his hands to his head when nervous, and it would have been too perfectly like a boy to do that now. Somewhere up the beach, a fishmonger dropped a knife on his own foot and swore with remarkable piety, juxtaposing words that priests and whores had never thought to hear together. The sound broke whatever had been waiting to break. Aegon drew breath. The woman inclined her head, just slightly, as if acknowledging that she had heard the promise he had made before he spoke it. Daenerys, he said. He did not add titles. He had such a one of his own and did not think to borrow respect by reciting other people's ribbons, not when ribbon would be undone by weather anyway. Aegon, she said, and her voice carried without shouting. Behind them the city leaned forward, a whole creature, curious and bright. On the next pier, a ship's master cursed at a boy for not catching a coil in time, and the coil splashed and bobbed and came back toward the boy like a dog that only pretends to run away. A blade flashed as a man cleaned his nails. The sun slid, lazy, toward the place where it would rest. The wind shifted. For a brief, delicate instant, as light fell just so across the water, the dragons were visible above the line of the ships. 3 shadows on the bright skin of the bay. They were not as large as mountains. They were not as small as the childhoods of the children who looked up and saw them. They rode the air like something that had never known the ground. Men saw them and forgot that they held hats or knives or baskets. Aegon saw them and did not flinch. He put his hand to his chest. He bowed. The bow a king offers another. The bow a boy offers an older boy. A bow of respect and of challenge, not of subservience. Behind Aegon, Varys watched it all unfold like a carefully arranged table setting which a cat had decided to sit upon. Serenity itself, because comfort requires the table to be for those who own it, and who owned the table was now in question. In the sept, the High Septon lit 6 candles and left the 7th unlit. He did not speak. He thought of Tommen's soft hands folded around a cup and a cat purring in a boy's lap. He thought of mothers and of ships. He thought of the day he had pressed a star into an empty socket and made a crown he had not wanted to finish. He lifted his eyes to the mother's window and did not ask. Asking is for those who can pretend they do not already know. In the Red Keep, Cersei stood at a window and watched the slant of the far light on distant sails and thought, not of dragons, not of sons, not of blood, but of the very private corner of her heart where, as a girl, she had once seen a maester lift a lid on a pot and show her eels writhe upon one another, and she had said, "Why do they do that?" And he had said, "Because they only know how." She smiled very slightly. "So do I," she said to the stones. "So do I." The city took a breath. It was not sure if it would hold it or let it out with a shout. Did neither. It stood and watched the 2 figures standing and not yet moving to meet each other fully, poised between an old world and a new one. And in that poised place it remembered itself as a city that had somehow survived all stories men tell themselves when they need to walk into the future without looking down. And in that breath-held pause, before footstep met footstep and intention became deed, before words became laws and dragons became judgments and driftwood was carved to look like crowns, in that last instant when it was possible to imagine that a man could set the world down as one sets down a kettle and say, "No more boiling for today," the wind lifted the skirt of Daenerys' garment an inch and set down a lock of hair upon her brow, and Aegon, seeing that very human untidiness, smiled like a boy, a smile no counsel could manage and no whisperer could calculate. And all the men who would one day die for one of them or the other felt for a heartbeat not fear, nor fury, nor the lust of belonging, but a simple, unaccountable hope that for once in this world, the weight might be chosen by those who must carry it.